When you have a female coded space, men don't thrive in that. They wither inside of that. And ultimately the women start to wither as well.
Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. As always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. Did you know that all of my interview segments are now being added to my audio podcast on Apple and Spotify? Simply search for Civically Minded and enjoy solid Christian content on your long commute, while you're at work or the gym, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcast. And be sure to tell a friend how they too can enjoy Civically Minded. And if you enjoy my content, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Well, my guest today is the president of New St. Andrews College, as well as a senior fellow of theology. He holds a DPhil in Oriental Studies and an MST in Jewish Studies from Oxford University in England. Grey Friars Letter, an MBA from Washington State University, an MA degree in English Literature, and a BS in Education, secondary education with chemistry, and a minor in history, both from the University of Idaho. He's a teaching elder at Christ Church in Moscow and regularly preaches at their downtown service. Dr. Merkle is the author of The White Horse King, as well as Defending the Trinity in the Reformed Palatinate. I want to make sure I try to pronounce that right. He and his wife, Rebecca, have 5 children and a growing generation of grandchildren. It is my pleasure to welcome to Civically Minded for the first time, Dr. Ben Merkle. Thank you, sir, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited, and I've enjoyed so much of what you've done from a distance. Of course, we're on two opposite sides of the country, and of course, this is the first time that we're meeting. But I've known of your work for a while, and have really admired what you've done. I've known a couple of children, young people. I'm pushing 50, so they seem like kids to me. And I'm sure when you spend every day at a college, you're thinking the same thing of they keep getting younger, and of course they're. So I understand. I've known a couple of students that have come out to your university. I serve with a gentleman with the last name of Oldham, and you have some Oldhams out there who their father is in my Presbyterian, a dear friend, and so the Oldhams are wonderful, wonderful people. And Meredith used to work at the daycare where our first child went to daycare. So we've known Meredith since my first was just a little thing. So wonderful
we've
people.
Enjoyed them.
And apparently you've kept a few of them. So we're grateful for all that you're doing to continue looking after the Oldham family.
Yeah.
So I wanted to discuss today stuff that's really right in your wheelhouse. So I'm going to start right off kind of talking about just some raw stats. I know for folks that are into statistics and number crunching, this will be their jam. For some of my audience, they'll kind of tune out until we start talking about what all of this means. But I was looking around and was looking at a website called bestcolleges.com, and it said that there are just over 19 million students that enrolled in U.S. colleges last fall in 2024. And that roughly 16 million of those students were enrolled in undergraduate programs, making about 3 million in graduate programs. And about 8.8 million of those were bachelor degrees. My biggest question with all of that, number crunching is it does seem like from the statistics that I read, college enrollment is up just a little, though it had been down for about 10 years. What do you think is causing some of the slight uptick that you're seeing in a renewed interest in college?
That's a really interesting question. I do think that one of the I'm just shooting from the hip here, so I'd have to dive in deeper. But one thing I suspect is that we have made the bar to entry to college much lower over the last few years. I say we, I just mean colleges in general. Right. Particularly in pushing things into online kind of mass-produced classes and whatnot. It's easier and easier to get in, to log credits and all of that. That's not to say it's better. I think that there's a real problem with that, but there's such a there's a strong conviction that somehow a college degree is this just really important sort of equalizer. Like if you have a college degree, it allows you entrance to the job market. And so there's this economic value to it. And I think particularly for people who are stuck in the sort of ideological um, battle over different oppressed peoples, and finding a need to give them a leg up, the answer is almost always we need to make the entrance into a college program easier and easier for them. Somehow this will equalize this sinful inequity. I don't. So that's kind of my suspicion, but that's just me shooting from the hip.
No, I mean, you certainly know more about that world than I do, but I tend to agree with you and I think that again could be statistically borne out that we're seeing high school graduates that are far less equipped than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. They're coming out not being able to read or not being able to do basic arithmetic. I mean,
Yeah,
things that are really quite shocking. And
yeah,
what used to be outliers in a couple of maybe the worst states in the country really have seemed to become, endemic across the nation. And it's small pockets that are doing well. And
yeah,
usually those would be your private schools, Christian schools, things like that. The public education system has really tanked in
yeah. And I
probably the
think that
last 10 years.
that probably also contributes to that inflation of numbers because what's happened is what as public education has tanked, and a good chunk of private education, as the K to 12 standards have lowered, students are graduating their senior year with an education that's the equivalent of what a sophomore or a freshman would have had 20, 30 years ago. And so what has happened is colleges have had to compensate so that essentially the freshman and sophomore year of most colleges is now remedial. It's the work that you would have done in high school. But as colleges have remade themselves and they've made this kind of remedial freshman and sophomore year, what's happened is a lot of people have then said, well, hang on, we could pull that into our high school. So you have a lot of high schools that are now doing these running start, whatever programs. So you have a lot of college students that are juniors and seniors in high school doing both high school and college at the same time. And that's going to massively increase the number of credits that are being logged across America. College credits are being logged, but that's not the same thing as a lot more people going to college.
Right, right. And I've had Robert Bortons on my program before as well. And his numbers as far as the increase in people doing whether it's a full homeschool or homeschool co-ops has really significantly um, taken a bite out of that public sector as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And states like yours and others that are starting to say, hey, you can have credit, some kind of taxational credit where you can apply the tax dollars that you would have spent as a husband and wife on public school system. We can now pour it into some other alternative school. Again, there's a debate on whether that's good or bad. I tend to not be a huge fan of that because once government money gets involved, it's hard to ever root it back out.
Yep.
But that, I am somewhat encouraged that at least there are sectors of the government that are admitting we're not succeeding extremely well, and maybe there's time and place to look for some alternatives. The other statistic, as I was looking through things, that really I don't know that surprised me is the right word, but that I just am almost disturbed by is that roughly 60% of all currently enrolled students are women. I don't think that's a big shocker, of course, and that about 16% of all undergraduate students are over 30. Those were two numbers that I was like, okay. Now, and so again, as someone who lives in this world of education, higher education, not only as just a college president, but obviously, as I was reading your bio earlier, you've went to a lot of higher education as well. So
Mhm.
you've spent most of your adult life in higher education.
Yeah.
What do those figures say kind of about what we're seeing culturally in higher education?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 16% of adults moving down into their undergraduate, I think that that's really a feature or a function of again, people thinking that somehow the undergraduate degree is the entrance into the job market. And so these are people who feel like they've got to go back and they've got to do this in order to get this piece of paper that will open certain doors for them. There's also a little bit of a perpetual, it's nice to be a student and not to be a worker. There's a perpetual, I don't know if it's a Peter Pan thing or perpetual childhood or something like that, but I do think that some people struggle to grow up, and a college campus can be a really good place to sort of, um, I don't know, um, preserve that weird little moment of your youth. So there's that. On the on the disproportionate representation of women in higher ed, that's something that has been it's been climbing for the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years. And because if you go back, 50 years,
Yeah.
it's a very different world. Some of that is a reflection on just the nature of America changing its understanding of what is a man and what is a woman, and particularly what is a family. I think that our young ladies are indoctrinated to despise the home and to think that they're only worth something if they're competing with men in the workforce. And I think that's a real, and so they're going aggressively after the college degree because they are looking to create professional lives for themselves rather than looking to start a family and whatnot. So there's that. That's kind of like a nationwide phenomena. If you look at our institutions themselves, I think one of the other things you notice is um, this is this is an observation I picked up from my father-in-law, is the way that institutions really can gravitate towards being sort of female friendly. It's really easy as an instructor to to gravitate towards preferring the feminine way of interacting with authority, the classroom structure, and all of that, because and I'm obviously speaking in the broadest, a broad painting with broad strokes here, but in general, um, my it's easy to have your star students being those girls who sit at the front and who write down every word. Is not going to be on the test. When you go and you give them the exam question, they repeat back to you. They've studied very carefully everything you've said, and they repeat it all back to you because they are made to please. They're made to try to give you what you want, and and it's very easy for a classroom to become sort of female coded, and for an institution to become very female coded, where that's the thing that is prized. Um, I remember, but that's not how a school has to be. That's not how a college has to be. I remember this one moment when I was at Oxford doing my master's degree. I did this master's in Jewish studies, and we were getting close to the finals for the whole program. And in Oxford, it's you do all of your finals at the end of your degree. So no matter when you took the course, no matter when in the program you took the course, your final is not until that last month of the whole program.
Wow.
You might have taken that class 2 years ago, fall semester, but you have to have it all still here, and you have to be ready for this final. And the Oxford finals are this very distinctive kind of quality to them. And so as we were getting ready for it, the program brought somebody in to talk to us about how to prepare for an Oxford final and how to do this really well. And it was this lady who was explaining all this to us. And most of the finals, you'll go in to this big room. There'll be 100 students or something from all different classes, and they'll just hand you one essay question and your little blue book, and you've got to write for 2 or 3 hours your answer to this question. And your essays, these things will be graded double or triple blind, meaning your name is not on it, it's just a number. So, and it's sent to 2 or 3 different instructors who all grade it and have to agree on the final grade. So there's a level of objectivity to it. You can't just pick your favorite student or whatever. You have to really examine the essay, and multiple people have to agree on that grade. And they were getting us ready for this final, and this lady was explaining to us how years ago they were having a problem because they kept noticing that Oxford disproportionately was grading men higher than women. and they couldn't figure out why was that happening because everything was graded double and triple blind. And so how are the instructors knowing, how are the graders knowing this is a man or a woman? And so they had this whole study to try to figure out, like, what this gender inequity. And what they realized is that basically Oxford and Cambridge were these flagship institutions of British culture, founded in the 13th century. And over that time, um, certain standards had become deeply ingrained about how they graded, how they interacted with people. And one of them was, as Oxford and Cambridge, they're graduating the young men who are going to fill the British diplomatic corps. Like in the 19th century, you graduate from Oxford one day, you could be leading troops in India or an ambassador to some foreign country in a moment. And what they were really doing was they were trying to create decisive people. And so their essays, they disproportionately preferred an essay that said something like, here's the question, here's the answer, and here's why I'm right. And that tended to be how men would engage with an essay question, whereas their female students tended to say, here's the question, there are multiple perspectives, and we can see how from each of these we can learn something, but it sort of reads the room and it's really attentive to detail, which can be, I think, a real female gift, but it doesn't have that sort of brash, assertive, and this is my position, this is why I'm right. And the graders preferred that kind of masculine answer, because that's how these institutions had operated for almost 1,000 years. I say all of that to say it's not necessary that a college classroom be like that. It's that a college classroom be female coded. I think it's possible to actually have an education that's very masculine coded. I still remember one of my favorite moments in Oxford was, I was taking this one Hebrew class, and I'm with it's a small class, 5 or 6 students. The instructor is the Regius Professor of Hebrew, meaning his chair had been appointed by Henry VIII. In the 16th century, he's in the world of Hebrew scholarship. This is like the top. He's the pinnacle. And I'm sitting in his class, and I think we were reading Psalm 23, and he said something about how the valley of the shadow of death. He took issue with that as a translation, and he makes his argument. And I'm sitting there, and I was like, yeah, but I pushed back. I was like, I don't think so, because, and I started to make my argument, and then suddenly I look and I realize who I'm talking to, and it was like, oh shoot, and I just clammed up, because I was like, that I don't want to be disrespectful. I'm not going to push against something like that. And I just still remember him looking at me with like big eyes and the biggest smile on his face, and him going like this, and he was just saying, come at me, come on. And it wasn't he wasn't like he wasn't trying to challenge me or something like that. It was more just like he just delighted in a student who would push against him and have an argument. And when you are a confident scholar, you delight in the students who bring a challenge to you. And so you can have a classroom that actually favors that kind of masculine presence. But it takes a very careful cultivation on behalf of the faculty. Whereas if you don't do that, what you start to get is a faculty who will just promote this whoever gives them the answer that makes them feel good as an instructor. And then you start to get this very sort of female coded classroom, which is, I'd say, how most of our college campuses are. That was a long answer.
No, that was a great answer, because I appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through that, because we didn't get here overnight, right? And
Right.
again, I said earlier, I've had Dr. Rigney on, and I can't help but hear your answer and hear some of that emoting, that Dr.
Yeah.
Rigney talks about so very much, with again, empathy not being a bad thing on the surface, but it can
Hmm.
be, it can become very, very unhelpful, very toxic, as he says,
Yeah.
in a hurry. And so the difference between, and again, I've got 2 daughters and I have a son,
Mm.
and can I parent them the same? I suppose I could, but I would I would be doing harm to either my two daughters by trying to expect them to be masculine like my son, or
Yeah.
to my son expecting him to be feminine like my daughters. So there's either going to be this kind of inbred emotive nature that most women have, again, broad brushstrokes, as you said,
Yeah.
or this kind of natural gravitas that men have. And yes, at 18 you don't have a ton of it, but you're starting to learn to have it.
Yeah.
And my experience has also been what you just shared. And that's not just true in the classroom, it's true of any of the best leaders at companies, at churches, in colleges, in nations, presidents or kings. A confident leader
Hmm.
is not afraid of someone who is exhibiting their own gifts,
Yeah.
because they want to pull those gifts out of you. They're saying, hey, you only make all of us better
Yeah.
by strengthening the whole unit.
Yeah.
The weakest leaders I've ever known are the folks that cannot abide being questioned, and they're
Yeah.
constantly pushing back on anyone that would give them any flack.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible place to be. So it's encouraging to know that there are still some places in higher education, or at least there were back in your time of taking your master's, where there were men that said, I'm not intimidated by you, young man. If
Yeah.
anything, I want to hear how you're processing the information. And I think
Yeah.
again, I'm on pastoral staff at a PCA church. I think the same thing with our people. At least I know you're engaging with the Bible.
Yeah.
Even if you're wrong, even if I disagree, I would rather you engage with Scripture than just let me spoon feed you. That's not helpful for me, and it's not helpful for you.
Yeah.
So,
Well, one of the things you just said is, you said something about it makes it better for everyone, when you can structure an institution like that. And I think that that's an important point, because it's not about saying, okay, we want all male students, we don't want female students. We want female students as well as male. I wanted my daughters all to have an NSA education, and I've all three of my daughters got BAs at NSA, and I want that for them. But one of the things I notice is when that 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 male coded space versus that female coded space, women thrive inside of a male coded space. When you have men being men, women thrive inside of that. When you have a female coded space, men don't thrive in that.
yeah.
They wither inside of that, and ultimately the women start to wither as well. It's this is just what makes a society healthy. One of the really interesting um, uh, demographic studies or whatever bits of data that we've pulled out of NSA is just noticing when we've had a class where the major more than 50% of the class was female. When we had that, our male degree completion rate in that class, basically the percentage of guys that finished with their bachelor's degree,
Mhm.
dropped. If you had a female prominent, dominant class, the male completion dropped. When you have a male majority, um, that's when the male completion rate stays solid and the female stays solid. It's funny if it's masculine dominant, the men can last. They can't last when it's female dominant. When it's female dominant, the men can't last. The women do, and that's the funny thing is the female degree completion rate stayed the same in either, but the male fluctuated dramatically based on like what is the prominent vibe of this classroom. And so I think that it's a healthier place for everyone when you can cultivate that kind of culture.
Well, which gets back to that initial statistic of if all universities and colleges are roughly 60% female, that's median, right? So that means there are some universities where it's probably 70,
Oh yeah,
75.
yeah,
you know, and
absolutely.
and then what you're talking about that you've seen from real data, real numbers from your school, that's going to come into play in a very significant way. And not just in so much as graduation and things like that, but the degree programs that they're going to cater to, the tenured professors and teachers they're going to bring in, the DEI quotients are
Mhm.
going to increase. I mean, and I think that's, again, I think the data would bear that out. the DEI quotients are going to increase as those numbers kind of go up. But, you know, to your credit, and I say you're as the president of NSA, I'm kind of letting you be federal head for your school, which let's be honest, in many ways you are. To your credit, NSA has produced some uniquely masculine and somewhat targeted commercials over the last couple
Yeah.
of years, and they feel more like ads from like um, the army from say the
Yeah.
1990s, you know, where it
Uh-huh.
was the be all you can be generation, and I'm pushing 50 years old, so those are the army ads that I graduated high school in 96. So those are the army ads I knew, where it was like all these really cool guys dressed in, you know, all the army gear, and it was nighttime, and they had, you know, all the kit that they would use, and it was like, I want to go do that, you
Right.
know. And so you guys have put out these kind of um again, not fully masculine. It's not like there's no females in these ads, but they are somewhat produced towards a masculine, more masculine audience. And I've got to say, they've been something. I've enjoyed watching them. I've always, when you guys have a new commercial come out, I'm kind of like, oh, I got to see what this one's gonna be. Of course, the Johnny Cash one
Yeah.
started a little bit of a kerfuffle,
Yes.
but you know, that again, I'm PCA. We just had our General Assembly. There was a kerfuffle there, you know. So I mean, it is what it is. We always you can't stay completely safe all the
Yeah.
time. How boring would that be? So I've got to ask, kind of whose brainchild, you know, or who was
Yep.
the brainchild behind some of these really exciting ads,
Yeah.
because they've had to have moved the needle in some ways, I would think.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I would say about 98% of the credit goes to my brother-in-law, Nate Wilson, who's an author. He is a part on the faculty for our MFA program here. He's an NSA grad himself, and is a prominent and prolific writer, producer, and whatnot. So we have a contract with his company for some of our ads. Some of them are. Uh, some of them are from completely in-house, our own marketing team, but probably the ones that have gotten the bulk of the attention really come out of Nate's pen. Although probably the first one that really kicked things off actually goes back to Gabe Wrench from Cross Politic.
Yeah, yeah.
Remember the old bathroom ad? That was his original brain child. It was massaged down the road, but that would be a Gabe Wrench one. Um, so yeah, and then so they'll propose something, and then I'll green light. I'll give a little bit of feedback and say, let's do this, let's not do that. So just yeah, just to be clear, there are breaks. There are many things I've said, no, we're not going to do that. We do. We're not always. It's not like I think people feel like most of the marketing at NSA comes out of like a 2 a.m. Video session where everybody had way too much Mountain Dew or something like that. It's actually a very sober and deliberate
Yeah.
process where we'll think tank it. I'll send Nate some suggestions. He'll come up with something. We'll go back and forth for usually like up to about a month of us going back and forth. I'll shoot it to other people, get everybody else's take on it, and then finally give the thumbs up, green light. If there's any, you mentioned I'm the federal head there, so and it's true. So if there's any like blame, that's on me. I'm the one that made the call on all of them, and but the original source is a few of those guys, but mostly Nate.
Well, again, that just proves your solid leadership, because I've said for years that another great quality of a good leader is, sure, they're willing to take credit when it's deserved, but they're also willing to take blame if and when needed. And so I'm not saying there is any blame that's needed, but the fact that you know immediately kind of spoke up and said, hey, if there is, it's me, you know. So
Yeah, I'm happy to
kudos
own. I'm happy
kudos
to
to you,
own
sir.
it.
You
Yeah.
know, but what I will say to your credit, you know, and again, I use you as again figurehead, um, is that most of those commercials have tried to speak to something going on in our cultural moment. You know, that
Yeah.
what's happening in the cultural zeitgeist, and you guys are trying to say, look, it doesn't have to be this way. You know,
Mhm.
and one of the things in the PCA, and it's not a PCA school, but it is a lot of PCA pastors come from Greenville Seminary. Greenville Seminary is got a very similar kind of vibe. They have one degree, If you go to Greenville Seminary, it's because you're going to get an MDiv. It's a
Yeah.
4-year MDiv, and their motto is "We train pastors." That's it.
Yeah.
And there's something very refreshing about whether it's a church, a person, a school, that knows who they are and doesn't make apologies for it, and just
Yes.
kind of says, "Look, we're not trying. We understand this is going to limit to some degree how many people will, ever come here, you
Yeah.
know, but we're not making the tent any bigger than this. The tent's plenty big because, you
Yeah.
know, we've counted the cost, like you said. This was all done intentionally.
Uh-huh.
We want people that this speaks to, so Greenville has said we're not taking women because, well, women shouldn't be getting MDivs
Right.
because women can't be pastors. So, I mean, and does that irritate some people? And beyond irritate, does it just downright piss some people off? Well,
Yes.
yeah, yes, it does.
I
But
got to spend a couple days out at Greenville this past year. I have very high regard for what they're doing and for their leadership. I think
yeah,
everything you're saying there is very apt and true. I'm very supportive of what they're doing. I think that you're reminding me of the old. I think there was an old like Saturday Night Live commercial about it was something like it was a commercial for this little product. It's a floor wax and it's an ice cream topping. You know.
yeah,
And you could do so many things with it. And what you discover is it does nothing well.
yeah,
What it does is it blunts all the edges. It takes everything less sharp. It makes everything dull. And so a lot of times I notice this I think a lot about how do you keep an institution on track and how do you keep an institution on its mission. And what you'll find is a lot of the proposals to that will ultimately undermine your mission. They're not proposals that say we shouldn't do that, we should do this. They don't usually say that. They'll say something like, "Yeah, you can do that, but wouldn't it also be okay to do this?" And then they start just bringing in, and I think that's how egalitarianism has come in, where you try to draw this line. I mean, I appreciate the complementarian impulse. And I think it roughly stated, just if you just roughly state the complementarian position, I think I fully agree with it. But what you discovered was right away people saying, well, that's true, but can't we also do this? And then couldn't we also have a master's degree for women in counseling who aren't necessarily pastors, but who are, and then you start like I guess that's possible. So you allow that. And then you allow this. And what you discover is 30 years later, you have lost your mission without ever having a direct conflict over the mission. You just slowly got told I have to also worry about this and I have to also worry about this. And I just think it's okay to be aggressively ambitious for your mission and to say no to everything else. And you do have to do that if you want to stay on track. You have to do that just day in day out. You have to stay aggressively on your mission. It's I find so many times people come in with great ideas. That's a great idea. Somebody could do that. I'm not going to because I'm doing this over here.
yeah. We one of the things I appreciate about the PCA, and we have our problems. Lord knows we are semper reformanda. We need to continue reforming. I'm grateful that for the last 3, 4, 5 years we have been shifting back rightward. We have rooted out not all, but a lot of the revoice stuff, a lot of the side B stuff.
Mhm.
We're attempting to root out the rest of it. We've tried to address again, an egalitarian drift that was, well, we can have deaconesses. No, no, you can't have deaconesses. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that even within my own denomination, we are attempting to be very aware that the Overton window, just by nature, because we're sinners, because we're east of Eden, the Overton window always shifts left. It's there's always mission drift, and if you're not careful and conscientious and really intentional, you just drift. I mean, it's like, again, being out at sea and you kind of fall asleep, you wake up and you're like, where in the world have I, I mean, you have no idea where you're at.
Yeah.
And so we have to be sober minded. And again, of course, scripture speaks to this, be on guard, be sober minded. The devil is a roaring lion, I mean, he's not taking naps. So it's very important that, again, whether higher education like what you do, or within the church, which of course you also do, and I do professionally, even on something like this channel that I run, I have to kind of know this is what I do. I mean, my channel is called Civically Minded. I talk about civics and the ecclesia, which of course you and I know is the church, and the family, and kind of, yeah, I get into a lot of cultural stuff and political stuff, but I don't do like movie reviews,
Mhm.
and I don't do, I went to culinary school when I was a much younger man, but I'm not doing videos on, how to make the best salsa. I mean, that's not what I do. I
Yeah.
do what I do, and I have to be very intentional about that. And that means sometimes I talk about things that people don't like. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, because I have to count the cost of what it is I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to build. And so I appreciate that whenever I see that in an institution. And again, I've watched from afar and really been encouraged and impressed by the way that NSA has went after a definition of who they're going to be.
Mhm.
And these are the kind of students that we want to come here and become kind of, to borrow one from your father-in-law, which, by the way, if you're watching and you don't know who his father-in-law is, who is your father-in-law?
My father-in-law is Doug Wilson. So
His father-in-law is, yeah.
I married his oldest daughter, Becca.
So your father-in-law says, talks a lot about slaying dragons, and
Yep.
and takes that, of course, from a lot of historical, both Christian and non-Christian literature, but Christian literature especially, and says, look, God raises up dragon slayers in every generation. So you have been very intentional about pursuing young people that want to come and learn how to slay dragons in their own world, and I give you immense credit for that. I think that's a good thing. So to that end, where do you see, not say, of course, where do you see NSA, but not just NSA? Where do you see, say, the future of Christian higher education, considering the struggles with woke ideology, DEI, critical theory, all of those things, as well as like the anti-Semitism that we've
Mhm.
been seeing on university campuses? And, some have become almost hotbeds for anti-Semitism lately. Where do you see Christian universities, colleges, grad schools, including but not limited to NSA, where do you see us as Christians being able to kind of pick up the pieces from some of these secular universities that have dropped the ball, and
Yeah.
how do we differentiate ourselves enough to maintain our own distinctives and keep, as you said, focused on mission?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think part of it, well, there's a difference between me predicting what will happen versus me prescribing what should happen. So I can tell you what I think should happen. Whether God is kind and blesses us with this kind of reformation at this time is another question. We wait to see what He's going to do. But I would say, what really has to happen is we have to wake up and see and understand how bad and how compromised things have become.
Mhm.
And my concern is that we are in our work to reform what is going on in America, in conservatism, in the Christian world, in Christian higher ed, in our work to to reform all of that, we are satisfied with far, far, far too little. The slightest little correction, everybody acts as if the whole thing has been fixed. I noticed this with just um, I noticed. Okay, I remember reading a Wall Street Journal article in December or January this year, or this last year, and they were noting how gun sales in America had plummeted immediately after the election, and they were referring to it as the Trump slump because basically you have conservative America that's frantic and nervous, and so they buy handguns, and then Trump steps into the White House, and all that nervousness just dissipated, and the sales plummeted. I think that ministries that are trying to radically reform our institutions, like our institutions of higher education, um, are what I'm concerned is that we've got this big, huge task in front of us. And then what happens is Trump steps in and now all the DEI offices are being closed down. and everybody's acting as if higher ed has been fixed.
Yeah.
Um, it has not even remotely been fixed. And in fact, even that DEI office that was closed and everybody's oh so excited because we've removed this thing that was toxic, those people weren't fired. The one office was closed. Those people were just moved into different departments, and they're still doing all the same things. These colleges are exactly the same, and I see our even Christian colleges that have been failing for decades now aping or mimicking certain kind of conservative talking points, and everybody thinking that these institutions have been fixed and flocking back to them when no, it all the rot is still there. And I think we need to get a lot more bold and a lot more aggressive and a lot more realistic about how bad things are. So I think the thing that I would love to see is first of all for Christian institutions to drop all of the secular arguments for college, and we need to make a distinctively Christian argument for why you ought to come to a Christian college, which is we are completing your Christian formation and we are setting you up for a lifetime of faithfulness to serve Christ. And there is a Christian cultural identity that 4 years at a robust Christian institution so deeply imprints on you that it will massively change your life. It will change your family. It will change your church. It will change every vocation that you have from here on. And I've seen it happening time and time again with NSA grads where these 4 years so completely imprinted on them an instinct and an impulse and a love for a certain way of living and serving God and wanting to make all of life serve him that they have a massive impact on their culture around them. And I just don't think we have enough Christian institutions who get that or who are authentically committed to that kind of mission. So we need honestly, I think we need to see a lot of our colleges fail and close down. It really is as bad as that. We need to see a lot of them fail and close down, and I think we need to see a lot more robust accountability required for these colleges for what they're actually doing. So if you have a institution that last year had a GLBTQ whatever office and was promoting all of these different things. And then this year they can just smell which way the wind is blowing. And so they're sort of quietly closing those things down. But you haven't changed the leadership. You haven't changed anything. It's still that same milk toast education. And we need to just purge all that out and have like really, truly robust leadership.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I often tell our people, um, at my local particular church that I serve at, but also my friends within say the PCA. And I keep going back to that because I'll speak to my own. You know, I grew up in the SBC, so I've still got family and friends in the SBC, and I speak to them too from time to time. But I serve in and I'm ordained in the PCA. So I say to my friends within my own denomination, and certainly like I said at our particular church, you know, pray what Joshua prayed. Lord, let the sun stand still. You know, give us more time and the tenacity to chase down the enemy and really win the day. You know,
Yeah.
not just take these small W victories and kind of go, hey, all right, because I mean, while I was at GA and celebrating some of the victories that I was happy to see while I was there this year. By and large, I think we had a good General Assembly. By and large, I think it was far less contentious than the last few.
Mhm.
Um, New York City elected, I mean, and it's presumptive, but it's no Republican's going to beat him because it's New York City. So New York City elected a socialist Shia Muslim as their next mayor. I mean, so
Yeah.
guys, it ain't fixed. There's real problems, and this is I am seeing a nation that is dividing almost geographically, to
Yeah.
where there are states and municipalities that are very Christian and Christianized, and there are states and municipalities that are very liberal and just as committed to that worldview as you and I are to the worldview of Christ being king. And that's a little scary,
Yeah.
as far as when you say that we are a nation that is one nation under God, indivisible. Well, that's not very indivisible. That is
No.
a lot of division, actually.
Yeah.
And so I I want to see Christians who really do, as so often is said these days, know what time it is, and
Uh-huh.
and not mistake a small victory for something that, needs to be chased down much further. And I say to that, um, your father-in-law recently had Stephen Wolf on an episode of Man Rampant, and I sat and listened to the whole 2-hour episode. I thought it was very helpful, especially because there had been some back and forth, and they had both kind of been on opposing sides of what, Christian nationalism is or should be.
Mhm.
And I found it exceedingly helpful to see men that don't agree on everything sit down and say, okay, I see this from the top down. Okay, I see this from the ground up. And
Mhm.
then both kind of go, I can live with that,
Yeah.
because we meet in the middle, right? I mean, if
Yeah.
if the grassroots guys are working from the ground up and the top down guys are working from the top down, then God willing, we meet in the middle and America becomes a much more healthy Christian reformed place than it's been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
To go back to Aaron Rinn's idea of positive world, neutral world, negative world. I mean, right now, neutral world's looking great, but of course, I want positive world. I want true Christian reformation.
Mhm. I agree, and I think that there is a well, this is just another way of describing how we need to cultivate masculinity because I think truly mature masculine men know how to keep everything in the right perspective and proportion, where where I can I can argue with somebody like where like if you're a reformed brother and we disagree on something, I can have that pointed, perhaps even heated, argument as we aggressively address something. But I need to also keep really clear on what my boundaries of fellowship are. That actually, this guy who he and I disagree over this one little thing are closer to one another than we are to almost anybody else in Christendom. And if I have to pick anywhere, if I'm in his town and I need worship on Sunday morning, I'm at his church because that's the one I'm actually closest to. I think of my it's funny over the last couple of years as my kids end up graduating from college and moving out and going to different places and seeing them and their cousins attending churches faithfully of pastors that I think if you were watching public kerfluffles you would think, oh, they would never darken the door of that, but like, no, you're actually my closest brother. And when we have this conflict, that's why, because we want to respect the integrity of this position that we hold, and we want to have this out. But we need to not be that kind of divisive as a result of it.
No, I thank you. That's incredibly not just helpful, it's encouraging to hear because again, the KDY, or Kevin DeYoung, for those who
Yeah.
may not know who KDY is, Kevin DeYoung, who was our moderator this year, of course, and who, 12, 18 months ago, whatever it was, wrote the article on the Moscow mood.
Hmm.
And but again, I look at that in exactly the same terms that you're saying. If we're looking at a 0 to 100 scale, those of us on the reformed side of the page are 92, 93 plus in agreement.
Hmm.
We are disagreeing on such a relatively small amount of things, yet we have incredible amounts of grace for the Mormon, incredible amounts of grace for the Muslim, incredible amounts of grace for, this person or that person who could be lost, oftentimes are completely, pagan. And yet we have in just nothing but, it seems at times, and I don't think it really is, but it does seem at times vitriol for one another. And it's like, the onlooking world kind of goes, wow, these guys don't even get along. And it's like, well, then we need to do better about not talking past one another.
Yeah.
Which is why I was so encouraged by that sit down on Man Rampant so recently.
Yeah.
I was at the American Reformer event, and Stephen was there just
Hmm.
recently at GA, and a couple of other guys from other worlds. William Wolf was there, who's a friend of mine from the SBC, who, of course, who William is. And so that there was this room full of guys of that bent,
Hmm.
kind of a very masculine, very robust, almost Christian, or again, what would be historically referred to as Christian nationalistic bent. But I had literally, before I walked in the door at that event, went to the GRN banquet that was at the Chattanooga Convention Center, which is the Gospel Reformation Network. And the keynote speaker at the banquet this year was Ligon Duncan. I think, and I don't think I'm crazy. I don't think I'm some weird cockeyed optimist. I think those two groups, while different, while very different, and you could see that in the men who attended each,
Mhm.
they have far more in common than they do even their own PCA brethren that may have been in the assembly hall who would still espouse revoice.
Yeah.
So I go, guys, if you could ever trust one another and not always kind of have that cross eye, what's this guy going to do next, then I think the future for the reform movement in America, whether you're talking PCA or CREC or Reformed Baptist, is only going to grow
Yeah.
because we are offering something that most the young men in this nation are so thirsty and hungry for. This masculine alternative to feminized, woke, weak church. So the guys that are listening to Andrew Tate,
Mhm.
or that are listening to Joe Rogan, or listening to guys like that who just are begging for someone to say, not only is it okay to be a man, you should celebrate it. It's
Yeah.
great. Be a
Yeah.
man. God made you a man, and lean into what it means to be a man. Just be a Christian man, be a decent man. Um,
Right.
the reformed world has something to say to those men. So I am very ambitious and hopeful and bullish about where we're headed as a movement, whatever denomination espouses that. With our time remaining, and I know we've only got a few, maybe 10 minutes left. I loved The White Horse King so much.
Oh,
I
good.
thought that was one of the best books I've read, honestly, in a few years. And I would be remiss if I had you on my show. And one, I didn't tell you that. And two, I didn't, just for the fewer minutes we have remaining, discuss a little bit about that book and kind of how maybe studying historical examples of practical Christianity, like King Alfred, and he's one of many. I recently completed Defenders of the West, and I had read Sword and Scimitar prior to that, and I'm eagerly awaiting his forthcoming book that I think is coming out in November. And all these wonderful Christian examples of practical men who took Christianity seriously. And you may disagree with everything they did, but
Uh-huh.
they at least looked at the world around them and said, I'm not okay with letting it slide.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a man for God in challenging times. And even if it cost me, I'm still going to do it. So, as we finish up here, how do we study historical examples of those practical Christians and their faithful application in the public square, and then use that to help us formulate ways to engage and shape culture, certainly now, but also as we move into the future?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, my wife's grandfather, so this would be Doug's dad, Jim Wilson, who was an extremely gifted evangelist, would always have, he's always be surrounded by young Christians because he was evangelist, so he was making young Christians all over the
Yeah.
place, and they would always ask, like, "How can I mature in the faith when I don't have people around to mentor me? How do I mature in the
Mhm.
faith?" And his answer was always read Christian biographies, and that was he was notorious for. I'm not exaggerating when I describe like whenever he left the house, he had his pockets stuffed with Christian biographies, and I can remember we're at Pizza Hut, and the waitress, he's so do you like to read? And he's working. He was in the hospital for a bit, and family had to keep going down to him, bringing boxes of Christian biographies because of how much he's handing them out. Anyhow, I think reading Christian biography is just really helpful because it gives you that Hebrews, great hall of faith, the hall of witnesses and their testimonies. It brings that alive and helps you to see it lived out. So I think it's just really healthy to be reading Christian biographies, which I had hoped the Alfred the Great, the White Horse King would be one good example of it. And then just as you study their lives, think about what were the foundational principles and their assumptions about how the world works that produce the kind of greatness in their life. I mean, I think with Alfred, the thing that I was really struck by was how much he accomplished as a military leader, as a civic administrator, the infrastructure that he built, as an academic, and the literary renaissance that he provoked. What was really interesting was how at the foundation of all of it was just a conviction about the gospel, the word of God, and the necessity of studying it. And it was really funny how odd, peculiar, how he saw the Viking invasion that he had to defend England from as the fruit of England having not studied the Word of God, and that he believed we needed to return to Scripture as a like policy of national defense. Like if we're not Christians who are sincerely in the Word, then we're going to be invaded by pagans, and so we have to actually be serious about our faith.
Which means, boy, oh boy, what would he have to say about the England of today that has been overrun by pagans? You know,
Yeah.
so
I was living we were living in England. I wrote that biography while we were at Oxford, and I had the Muslim takeover in England in mind the whole time. When I'm writing about Alfred and the Vikings, I'm looking at England falling before the Muslims because it was ever present. So a lot of how as I wrote that, the immediate application to me was obviously this Islamification of England that needs to be addressed.
yes, needs to be addressed, and now it's coming to New York City. So it's
Yeah,
lest we fall asleep at the wheel, it can happen here. I mean, we saw the Hindu god, that was immortalized there in Houston, what, last year or earlier this year. I mean, that we are we're ripe for it. And so men of God, if you're hearing this today, rise up. Ask God, like Joshua, for the sun to stand still, metaphorically, of course, and chase down the enemy. And I know language like that makes us uncomfortable in the modern era, but Christ was not uncomfortable with such language. He said, "You are either for me or you are against me."
yeah.
And so we only hearken back to our Savior when we say that, no, Christianity is an exclusive of, there's an exclusivity about Christianity. It is not a big tent that everyone gets to stand underneath. So, well, thank you to my guest, Dr. Ben Merkle. It exceeded every expectation, and I've been excited about this interview for a couple of weeks. So, thank you so much for doing it. I again celebrate your victories there at NSA. Again, got connections through our local presbytery, and so tell the Oldhams that we say hello, and we certainly love them and appreciate all that they are doing there.
I'll do
And
that. Thanks so much for having me.
oh, it's been my pleasure. And for all of you that watch and support what I do here at Civically Minded, thank you as well. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the content with someone else. Leave me a comment below on how the ministry has blessed or challenged you. I really do read every single one of them. And so until next time, I'm your host, Corey Wing. And remember, be brave, be bold, and be civically minded. God bless.